Welcome to episode 2, where I speak to Fadiah about her thesis. So let's try to unpack the People's Constitution, this idea of the Union,
Yes.
right? Which essentially means, Malaya and Singapore. Or
Yeah.
Malaya was present day Malaysia and Singapore.
Yes.
The project of being one and whole,
Yeah.
which is what your thesis explored. Um, when you articulated that this was an aspiration in the past, and possibly even an aspiration in the future, what
Yeah.
kind of reactions did you get?
People were quite surprised that, oh my God, I didn't think that Malaya was also about Singapore. Like, yeah, because of the shared history, right? That has been completely obliterated. And they're like, oh yeah, we're not just talking about Malaya as an entity, but Malaya is always indivisible from Singapore. So we have even the drafters of the People's Constitution, they were people like John Eber, people like Lim Kian Chai. They were all part of this organization called the MDU, the Malayan Democratic Union, based in Singapore. And everyone was like, even people in Malaysia would be so surprised to learn that, oh, we were connected in that way, yes. So, we have Usman Awang, our national laureate, who moved to Singapore after the declaration of the emergency to start organizing with writers to talk about the Malay world, that legacy and how that world is always about trying to include people, trying to talk about the history before colonialism, where we would never exclude anyone who came and interacted with us. So that's the basis of the People's Constitution, because they wanted to use that idea of Malayness to grant equal citizenship to non-Malays. And now we look at our current constitution and we see that that's not the case, because the Malays are the superior race as defined by the constitution. We are entitled to special privileges. We are entitled to the special position that is attached to the state. And that is causing division and also material consequences, like people are denied access to higher education because they're not Malay. So for me, I think even in Malaysia, people are still trying to grapple with all these histories that are a part of us, but somehow it got silenced. This part of history, it's silenced, and when you talk about it, it's like, oh my God, it's almost like a revelation and also like a internal contradiction that you have to grapple with. It's not something that's easy for people to accept. But at the same time, the moment people understand that history, because I talk about it all the time, we've had like teach-ins, with different groups to talk about this particular history, and they find it very empowering. They find it inspiring that it is possible to imagine something that is just, something that would grant true equality. Because we talk about all these notions of equality, justice, but this is something that's material. This is something that is based on objective facts, based on real history of the country. And you can't erase that. It happened, it took place, and it was suppressed precisely because it had that potential to subvert the racializing project brought by our colonial master. And of course, supported by the Comprado class, UMNO at the time.
Okay. Well, the racialization project is now complete.
Yes.
So in contemporary Malaysia and Singapore, based on your time in Singapore and your familiarity with Malaysia, do you think the Union project, I guess my question is, how do you think the Union project, as articulated in those times, would sit in modern day Malaysia and Singapore?
I think we're going to have to compete with dominant ideas that it's impossible to change. It's impossible for us to be equal. It's impossible for Malaysia or Singapore not to be defined along racial lines. It's almost like a given, right? That this is the reality that we have to live with. So we have to contest those ideas because those ideas are always reproduced by the state, by the media, by different actors who have access to state power, for example. And as people who don't have access to those resources, I think the question is, how do we organize our ideas? How do we organize our thoughts so that we can have unity of thought that would lead to unity of action? Action that would bring about radical change, total transformation of society that is desperately needed to elevate people who are left behind, people who are denied the most basic of rights. Yeah.
Okay, when you were talking about this idea embedded in your thesis, the People's Constitution, the idea of the Union, and during your time in Singapore, when you had a chance to have conversation, whether it was research oriented or just even casual, how do people in Singapore respond to the Union idea, past or present?
When they learn about the Constitution, the People's Constitution, and what it sought to achieve, they were surprised and they were intrigued by this particular document. They're like, oh wow, I never thought that something like this existed. I never thought that this political project was in place in history. And I was like, yeah. And I found that kind of response inspiring because it really feels like, you have that consciousness of what we could be in the future. And it's not something that we have to invent all over again. We have this history that can act as our frame of reference because that's the reason they have to erase that history, right? So you have to look at it in a dialectical way. Why would they suppress that history? We read about the emergency, how brutal it was, not just about physical violence, also about epistemic violence, about erasing who we are as a people. And when people learn about this piece of history, that, oh wow, we can be that humane nation, that just nation that our ancestors articulated and envisioned, they were like, wow, we have to talk about this. So I'm really grateful that I had that time where I got to interact with people, with students, with youth in Singapore, in Malaysia, to talk about this piece of history that we never learn in school. So there's a lot of potential, I would say, in understanding and learning about erased history, because that is when that moment of possibility was there, and it's something that should motivate us to look at what we can do, what we can learn from our past history, and how do we move forward from there, right? It's about having that frame of reference, like something to anchor us so that it is always grounded in something that is universalizing. It's about, at the end of the day, it's about trying to uphold this idea of everyone deserves to live with dignity. It's very simple. Like, everyone deserves to live with dignity. No one should be left behind. Everyone has a right to access education. Everyone has a right to healthcare. Everyone has a right to participate in both social and political life. That's the most basic thing, I think, but the most suppressed, the most feared somehow. And that's the reality that we have to confront.
Do you think in Malaysia there's a desire to unite with Singapore?
I think right now, I don't think so because we fight over almost anything, like even food. You know, some people might laugh, right? Oh my God, why are you guys fighting over food? You know, like which is better, nasi lemak in Malaysia or nasi lemak in Singapore? For me, it's like that's division. Like that's one of the many manifestations of division. We forget that nasi lemak is shared. Rendang is shared. It does not belong to one country. It's because we have internalized the logics of colonial borders, right? That everything is separate and individualized. We are no longer a people that used to share the same history, the same culture, the same conception of the world. We had our own civilization. And our civilization was expansive, was inclusive. And look at us today. We fight over food because even food is like, it's ours, not yours. That's division. And that
how about
comes with
how about in Singapore? What's the vibe there?
I think it's the same. It's the same because the logic of nation states, colonial borders, division, racial categorization, everything is, these are all the same manifestations of the same system that still governs us.
Do you think there would ever be a move towards some kind of union?
I think it is something that must be fought for. Union in a sense that we want to unite either by, I mean, we can articulate what kind of unity we want. You know, we can still be separate states, but still, you know, the Bandung Conference, for example, it's about uniting people in the global south. It's about the idea of Melayu Raya or Indonesia Raya. It's about uniting Malaya with Indonesia. And of course, Singapore was also part of that project. It's about trying to unify people and nations that are fragmented in different ways. But it's about this concept of unity, which is very important because colonial legacies leave us in a state of fragmentation. And because we are fragmented, because we are fractured, it's impossible to talk about uniting to build a just future for our nation, for our region, for the world. You know, we have sectarianism. You know, we have supremacist ideologies like Malay supremacy, Hindutva in India. In Sri Lanka, we also see that. These are all the questions that we must ask ourselves and investigate. We have to understand the historical context in which all these ideologies came into being. Then only once we have that clarity on the ideological functions of all these ideologies, that we can devise a strategy to dismantle those ideologies and also the systems that reproduce the ideologies, so we can build a nation, a world, a region, a world that is humane, that upholds humanism.
So that was Fadiah speaking to me about her thesis on the People's Constitution and the Malayan Union. Join me on the next episode, episode 3, where she speaks to me about her experience around the deportation. And also, don't forget to catch episode 1 if you have not already done so.